Imagine waking up to find the price of your favorite gadgets, clothes, or even your morning coffee suddenly higher. Not because of inflation, but because of a single Supreme Court decision. Right now, that's not just a hypothetical. Wall Street, global markets, and everyday consumers are all holding their breath as the Supreme Court prepares to rule on the fate of billions of dollars in tariffs imposed during the Trump administration. Let's break down what's at stake, why this is such a big deal, and how it could impact everything from your investment portfolio to your shopping list. First, a bit of background. Back in 2018, the Trump administration imposed a series of tariffs, essentially taxes on imported goods, on hundreds of billions of dollars worth of products, mostly from China. The stated goal was to address what the administration saw as unfair trade practices, intellectual property theft, and a ballooning trade deficit with China. Over the next few years, tariffs were slapped on imports ranging from steel and aluminum to electronics, clothing, and even some food items. China, in turn, retaliated with tariffs of their own on American goods. This back and forth became known as the US-China trade war. Fast forward to today, and those tariffs are still largely in place. They haven't just affected multinational corporations or factory owners. Consumers have felt the pinch too. Economists estimate that US businesses and consumers have paid more than $100 billion in extra costs as a result of these tariffs. In many cases, companies passed on the higher cost to customers, so the price tag for things like cars, washing machines, and smartphones crept up. Now here's where the Supreme Court comes in. Several companies and trade groups have challenged the legality of these tariffs, arguing that the executive branch, meaning the president, overstepped its authority. Their case hinges on how much power Congress has delegated to the president when it comes to trade policy. If the Supreme Court rules that these tariffs were unlawfully imposed, it could force the government to refund billions of dollars collected from importers. That's a massive sum, potentially enough to shake up quarterly earnings, stock prices, and even the value of the dollar. Franklin Templeton strategist Rick Polsinello put it succinctly: a lot hinges on how the Supreme Court rules on tariffs. And he's absolutely right. For Wall Street, this isn't just about legal fine print, it's about uncertainty. Investors hate uncertainty, and a ruling of this magnitude could unleash waves of volatility across the financial markets. Let's look at what could happen, depending on how the Supreme Court decides. If the tariffs are upheld, not much will change in the short term. Companies will continue paying higher prices for imported goods, and consumers might see more of those costs passed on at the register. Some industries, like American steel and aluminum producers, might breathe a sigh of relief, since tariffs give them a competitive edge. But for others, like manufacturers that rely on imported components, or retailers who source products from overseas, it means continued pressure on profit margins. But if the court strikes down the tariffs, the implications could be huge. First, companies that have paid billions to the government might be eligible for refunds. That could boost balance sheets for some, and even lead to a surprise earnings bump for firms that had set aside reserves for tariff payments. The dollar could weaken as international trade flows adjust, and you might even see a short-term rally in stocks that have been weighed down by tariff costs. Think technology, retail, and auto companies. On the flip side, a sudden removal of tariffs could shake up domestic industries that have grown used to less competition from imports. U.S. steel and aluminum producers, for example, might struggle to compete if cheap foreign metals flood back into the market. That could lead to job losses or even plant closures in some regions. So the ruling isn't just about international trade. There are real-world consequences for American workers and communities. And let's not forget the geopolitical angle. The US-China relationship is already tense, with disputes over technology, security, and human rights. A Supreme Court decision that strikes down tariffs could be seen as a de-escalation, making room for new trade negotiations. Alternatively, it might prompt calls for Congress to pass fresh tariff laws, leading to a new round of political wrangling. Historically, US presidents have had broad, but not unlimited power to impose tariffs. Major trade actions usually stem from congressional approval, like the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of 1930, which worsened the Great Depression by sparking a global trade war. In recent decades, though, Congress has delegated more authority to the White House, allowing presidents to act swiftly in the name of national security or economic necessity. This Supreme Court case could redefine those boundaries, setting a precedent for years to come. So what should investors and everyday consumers watch for? First, keep an eye on sectors most exposed to international trade: tech, autos, and retail. If the tariffs are struck down, those industries could see a boost. Second, watch for volatility in the currency markets. Trade policy has a direct impact on the strength of the dollar, which in turn affects everything from corporate profits to the price of imported goods. And finally, be prepared for some political fireworks. No matter how the Supreme Court rules, you can bet that lawmakers in Washington will have plenty to say. Some will push for more protectionist policies, while others will argue for free trade and open markets. The outcome could shape not only the final years of the Biden administration, but also the future of U.S. trade policy for a generation. At the end of the day, this Supreme Court decision is about much more than tariffs or trade deficits. It's about the balance of power in Washington, the rules that shape our economy, and the prices we all pay as consumers. So as Wall Street, Main Street, and global markets all wait for the final word, one thing's clear: the ripple effects of this ruling will be felt far beyond the courtroom. Whether you're an investor, a business owner, or just someone who likes to keep an eye on the price of your next smartphone, this is a moment to watch. After all, when the highest court in the land weighs in on the world's biggest economy, the impact can be felt in places you'd never expect.